Bernard, you have been the ringmaster at lots of these things in the past. How do they operate? Give us a sense of how the politicians approach these things, but also how the broadcasters do.
The ringmaster, yeah. Sometimes it does resemble a little bit of a circus, including. But let's start with the national leaders debates, because the first one took place in April 2010. Alistair Stewart, the first leaders debate, it was called. It was watched by 10 million people at its height, and all of the political parties agreed with all of the broadcasters. I think 64 different rules that would underpin how these programs were going to go, right the way down to how these programs were directed. I mean, they were micromanaged to
That was Yeah, that was the "I agree with Nick" debate, wasn't it?
I agree with Nick, and in fact,
Nick Clegg, who
Clegg.
older listeners will remember was once Deputy Prime Minister.
Yes, indeed, and of course, as a result of that particular programme, there was about half a dozen polls. And one poll, 61% of those who'd watched the programme thought that Clegg had won. There was, and this is one of the consequences of these debates, it can actually dominate the news agenda for a couple of days afterwards. There was that whole thing of Clegg mania. And there was all this sort of rush to the blood of the head journalism predicting that the Lib Dems might have a big breakthrough, might get to 100 seats. In the end, actually, despite the fact you had all of this Clegg mania, the Liberal Democrats actually lost 5 seats by the time we got to polling day. So there was no direct correlation between that programme and the eventual performance of the Lib Dems. So those were micromanaged in terms of the roles.
Yeah. Does that mean, do you think that I mean, there's obviously an interest in the press and particularly television to hype up these contests, but do you think that actually really demonstrates that they tend to reinforce underlying views that people watching them already held? It sort of confirms people in what they thought rather than helping change their minds.
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. I would also say that I don't think that the debate directly changes people's minds, but because the issues which flow from the debate, and I would imagine we'll get 1 or 2 lines out of the debate on Monday night, what that does is that it helps condition the news agenda, and it helps condition the shape of the campaign and the issues that then are given an airing, and that can lead to people changing their vote. So I think their effect is indirect rather than direct, but of course, there's a long tradition in Scotland of these party leaders' debates going back many decades now. And I can tell you, it's much easier to get the Scottish leaders into a room than it is to get the UK leaders. There's none of this micromanagement in terms of a whole series of rules about how directors take shots and all that kind of stuff. But there is a sense in which they are overwhelmingly phony, absolutely phony. Every single word that will come out of their mouths on Monday night at 9 o'clock on STV will have been pre-rehearsed, utterly and completely pre-rehearsed, right the way down to the introductions.
Yeah, and so, but when you're acting as the referee, as you have in the past for these things, how do you avoid, if you like, being played by the politicians? Because they have the things that they want to say, obviously, but you, as the when you're asking the questions, how do you keep them on track and sort of force them to answer the things that you think they actually should be answering?
Well, and to a certain extent, it depends on which format you go for. You could go for a straightforward question time format, which is essentially audience driven, or and the debate on
that's
Monday
always
night.
Very dangerous because you look at the sort of people who attend these things and so on, and that is not a representative sample of the population.
Well, that is a separate question as well. How you recruit your audience, and let me just tell you. I mean, the Salmon Darling debate during the referendum, I know it wasn't a general election situation, but the key thing over that with the Better Together campaign, and I was in several meetings, the only thing that they were concerned about was how you're recruiting the audience, because they had the view that all of these audiences were pro-yes. And actually how we recruited them was that we got an external polling agency to make sure there was a geographical spread. We asked people how they voted. We made sure that the audience was representative of people as a whole. There was a a piece of work done by a polling agency, which was then handed to STV. Our research team then phoned all of these people back to ensure that they weren't telling fibs to the polling organisation. When we were happy that we had a representative audience, we actually seated, people were given individual seat numbers to ensure that people couldn't herd together and talk and act as a sort of clapometer for any one side. People had to bring ID, they had to bring a letter. Every member of the audience was checked on the way in. I mean, people just see an audience when they tune into a programme, but the steps that you take to ensure that the audience is not biased is pretty significant, because you know at the end, the starting point for this for a broadcaster is to say, what happens if we end up at Ofcom? What if there's a complaint to Ofcom that we were behaving in a scandalous way in behaviour of one argument or one party? We have to make sure, or the broadcasters have to make sure, that they have a complete and utter defence to these kind of charges.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fascinating. A lot of people, I mean, I love the idea of this sort of high security operation before Salmond versus Darling and so on, you know, that sort of background checks, Secret Service background checks on every member of the audience.
Well, can I tell you that there were people who turned up? Now, not only did they get a letter saying, you must bring this letter, people were then phoned and told, you must bring this letter. And if they didn't bring the letter, they didn't get in. There were people who were turned away because we couldn't be sure. We simply couldn't be sure that they were genuine because they didn't bring their letter.
and then you go to all that trouble and both sides think the audience is biased against them anyway.
Correct. Correct. And the person presenting the programme, you will get. So during that, I was a cheerleader for Yes, or a swivel-eyed goon, depending. Allegedly, depending on your point of view.
Yeah, well, that's the advantage that newspapers and print have, is that we aren't bound by those sort of conventions and regulatory requirements and so on. So, although even there, so I mean, voters are really weird. I mean, I voted no in 2014 and was reasonably clear about that, I think. And then subsequently get accused by people on the, if you like, ultra Yoon faction that Massey's a soft nationalist and so on. He's forever cozying up to the SNP and giving them the benefit of the doubt and so on. And you start thinking, well, God, these people are allowed to vote,
The reality is that people will take from what journalists say whatever they want, actually, to stand up their point of view. I did a broadcast on the eve of 2014, in which I basically said that the exercise of a civic duty by Scots tomorrow will change a country and make history. And this was interpreted by people as if a broadcaster would, as urging folk to go out and vote yes. What people who were saying, this is an argument for voting yes he's giving, they didn't actually look at the entire two-way that I did in studio, which was to say the narrative of recent days has changed. We've got the vow from the three Westminster leaders. We're getting change after this vote. It's only a question of what change you get, whether you get more powers, whether you get independence. When you take the answer in its totality, it's completely and utterly neutral in terms of any one point of view. But people they hear something and they say, we've got him. He's one of those.
Yeah.